You guys, I'm not really one to come out to like share testimony, all of this testimony time. But I actually saw God play out, and I feel like this is Him just trying to let me know that because a couple of events have happened in the past couple of weeks where certain conversations have come up and people have said they were beginning to question if God really answers prayers. And at that point, I started thinking about it. And it felt like I was going through a shift too. Like, yes, I've seen people really pray and they trust God. Why is it that these things they still don't get what they want? Actually, I don't have an answer to that. But I can just say that I got a message. So, we have a group where we pray. There's a group where we pray and intercede for patients that are on admission. And we take turns, to make certain prayers. And ever since we started these prayers, there has been a shift. When I say a shift, there are times when we see a patient's state is really bad, but you still see the patient, still making progress. In fact, sometimes you would have envisioned that this patient might not make it through the night, but the patient still makes it through not one night, not 2 nights, not 3 nights. And even though the patient sometimes still eventually pass, for me, I still see God's hands in all of it. But this particular one I'm sharing, it just made me to understand that God is still there. He's still in the business of doing things. And when we ask for certain things at certain times and He doesn't grant it to us, I just feel like He knows best. And that's why sometimes whenever I say certain prayers, I always say things like, not my will, but your will. Because I feel like God's will supersedes every other form of, thing that we might wish or crave for ourselves. And so this particular night, it was Friday. I'm making this video is Sunday, the 15th of March. And as at Friday, I was the one to take the intercessory prayers. And while I started making these prayers, it was at 10 p.m. I had taken out a Bible passage, and that was Psalm 23 verse 4 that says, even though you walk through the valley of the shadow of death, you would fear no evil, for I am with you. And I held on to that word and I prayed 2 prayer points. The first prayer point was centered on death. I prayed against every spirit of death among staff of the facility. And the second part was that God should be with every single patient on admission in our facility. While I was praying, I shifted. There was a shift, and I had just one patient's name in my head, and it was all about pray for this patient. So I started praying, and while I was praying, there was a single prayer point I made. I said, oh Lord, help this patient. Let her come through. I want her to leave the ICU and go home to breastfeed her baby. And then I said, oh Lord, by my next shift, because I was off that day, Friday, to resume back on Sunday, I said, I want to walk into the ICU, see this patient, and I want to see this patient seated. People of God, I'm sharing this testimony because it was exactly as I said it. So for some weird reasons, I got to work this morning, and normal me, I would always go into the ward and go and see the patient. I delayed for a bit, and because I had a lot of paperwork to do and the rest. So as soon as I was done, something took me in there. And guess what? I found this woman. She was seated up on her bed and she was sipping tea. When I left the ICU, this woman was intubated. She had tubes on. But at the end of the day, I saw this woman. She was sipping tea and she was just on normal nasal oxygen program. And I'm like, God, you have done it. I walked up to her and I said, congratulations, ma. And I gave her a thumbs up. She smiled at me. She doesn't know me, but she kept looking at me. She could not even understand what was going on. But deep within me, I was excited. I was like, God, you did this one. Anybody that says that God is not still in the business of answering prayers is a joker. That he does not answer the prayer at that particular time does not mean that he doesn't answer prayers. It just goes on to say that it isn't right or it is not the right timing. I don't know how to express this, but I'm just so grateful to God for this. And this is my way of saying that healthcare professionals, we also have that duty and the call to stand in the gap for our patients. It goes a long way. Before now, it wasn't making sense, but right now, it is making a lot of sense. Within this period of our prayers, we've been able to discharge a patient that had diphtheria. I tell you guys, we've not had so much success rate like that. Most of the time, little kids, they are unable to, but this child was treated and was discharged. God is answering prayers, or healthcare professionals. You can also play a role in actually interceding for your patients. It goes a long way. I hope that somebody finds this video inspiring enough to still trust God, in his or her lives. That's all I can say. Glory, glory, glory.